Now passing it over to Bonnie Claremont.
Good morning, good afternoon, friends and relatives. I think there are some folks from Alaska, so I added the good morning. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. This is a webinar number 3 in a series of 3 webinars that I've focused on, particularly on advocacy issues, victim advocacy issues. And today is reaching across jurisdictional boundaries to address victim safety and promote offender accountability. Next slide. It's our grant disclaimer. I won't read it to you. So today's learning objectives, what I want to share with you in the brief amount of time we have, of course, as Indian people, we're kind of storytellers, so I always prefer on-site, but this particular project will limit our training technical assistance to virtual. But today's learning objectives are the following. I'm not going to read all of them to you, just want to provide a brief overview. So I want to talk briefly about the importance of understanding tribal sovereignty and also the importance of interagency coordination and collaboration, because I feel that kind of relationship is mutually beneficial to our nations and our neighbors and our partners doing similar work. And I feel that with today's economy and all of the issues out there, I think this is so important, the opportunity to share resources and collaborate. Within understanding, the history of tribal sovereignty, I believe is really important. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, Also, I want to share just a little bit later about sexual assault response teams. And of course, not all tribes have such teams. I wish they did. But for those that have teams like SARTs or other teams that are focused more on domestic violence, such as CCR teams, I believe they're also very beneficial to the work of working across jurisdictions, working across disciplines. So I want to share some of that with you as well. Also, just to look at the issue, the importance of providing culturally appropriate trauma-informed, victim-centered services. So I'll touch briefly on that, and in particular as it relates to legal assistance service delivery, and that's our target, pretty much our target audience. So for those of you that are doing work in that area, I totally welcome you, and I invite you all to share anyone that you know of that are providing legal services to tribes that are, either they're located on tribal land or adjacent. Feel free to refer them to us. We would love to share information with them. Next slide. And as I said, sovereignty is so important to us. It's something that we've worked long and hard for to retain. And so this gives a little description of, not necessarily a definition, and I'm not going to read it all to you. But in essence, it's the ability for tribes to govern and to protect and enhance the health, safety, and welfare of tribal citizens within our territories. So in order to do that, we have our governance structures, we have our laws, we have our police departments, and we also have our tribal courts. And so it's it's a long history of struggle for us to be able to exercise that sovereignty. And it's so important when we talk about safety for our tribal citizens. And later on, my colleague, my friend Kelly will be talking about VAWA and the reauthorization of VAWA, and how that also is recognizes our our authority to exercise special criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians that commit major crimes on our tribal lands. So, which is, I think, really important, again, for those that may not be familiar to know that information. Next slide. So this is just some pointers, some tips on understanding tribal sovereignty when working with Native victims. I believe that it's important to become knowledgeable on the importance of tribal sovereignty and the history of our tribes, because we're really proud of that history, just like any nation, just like uh, any tribal people. We have worked long and hard to retain our history, our language, our culture. Um, and I believe it's to be appreciated, to be respected, and especially, like I said, our struggle to exercise our tribal sovereignty as it relates to keeping our citizens safe and holding violent offenders accountable. Also, I think it's good to be able to educate yourself on tribes that are near you if you're not a tribal member, or if you're not native. So to get a better understanding about the geographic boundaries, the tribal history, because like I said, we're very proud of our tribal history and our origins. Also, each tribe has annual cultural celebrations that are generally open to the public to come and share it within our culture, such as powwows. I think it's good to understand a tribe's governing body, who the tribal leadership are, their names, their backgrounds. Also good to understand the resources on tribal lands near you. We're very proud of our resource. We have a long history of preserving, protecting our resources, and they're really important to us, right? Because they're part of our survival. Um, Generally, every tribe that I've visited or that I've wanted to get information on has a website. So I also like to encourage you to visit tribal websites. And you'll find that our people are very hospitable. We have strong values in sharing our resources, but also we have a lot of cultural values that, where we teach our young about preserving, protecting our resources as well. Um, and like as an advocate, my background is doing advocacy work. And, anytime we talk about crimes against people, especially, crimes of domestic violence, sexual assault that might be occurring on tribal lands, I think the people, the movers and shakers within any tribal community are the advocates. So I encourage to reach out to those programs to see what's going on, what kind of crimes are occurring, what kind of responses that exist to those crimes. And I also, encourage, if you are going to collaborate with a tribe that you're not a member of, and even if you are a member of, to really gain the support of tribal leadership, right? Because oftentimes we need resources, whatever it might be. Maybe it's office space, or maybe it's inviting them to meetings that, where they could become more educated about the problems that exist within a tribal community. So I also encourage that. Also, it's customary to, as a visitor on any tribal land that you're not a citizen of, to acknowledge yourself as a visitor. And that's something that we all try to do at TLPI, because our work of providing these services brings us to many tribal reservations and tribal lands. So it's respectful just to acknowledge yourself as a visitor. Recognize and understand the importance of the government to government relationships. Not all reservations, tribes have gaming revenues, for example, and they rely a lot on the resources that are guaranteed within those government to government relationships, for example. So I encourage you to learn more about that. I think it's a rich history. Share information on the legal services if that's the type of services you provide and the kind of resources that you have available. And again, like I said, I think the advocates are the best people to contact if you have legal services that might benefit victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and so forth. So, and come with resources to share if you happen to visit an office or someone who works in the field in that community, or if you're invited to participate within a meeting or a team meeting or a task force meeting, come with resources to share. Again, there's been that long history of historic distrust for a variety of reasons, but that really helps to create those good working relationships and good fellowship among our people and non-tribal members. And then also just be able to provide your availability if you are available to do some collaborative work, and who would be the primary contact for that. Next slide. You'll hear often about the terms victim-centered, trauma-informed, and there's a lot of different definitions, I guess, or perspectives on that. Um, when I talk about victim-centered, I talk about meeting each person where they're at, and what they identify as their needs, and allowing them, enabling them, empowering them to take the lead on what kind of services that they want to pursue, and what they're looking at, what are their goals. Um, and the definition I have here includes a systematic focus on the needs and concerns of victims of crime. And the word systematic, I think, is important because, I think I really like to see victim-centered responses become part of protocol and practice for anyone that's going to be providing services to victims. So it's not just kind of an add-on, but it's really centralized to the work that we do to empower and to provide opportunities for healing and recovery for victims. And it, of course, emphasizes victims' well-being and safety needs of victims. Also, the term trauma-informed care, it's a framework for services and support that acknowledges the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery. So for for us as Native people, we have a long history of trauma. And so it's not only understanding and recognizing, acknowledge that history, becoming familiar with that. And each tribe has their own history. And sometimes that history is even included within, like I said, their website. They may give you a little history on their background, uh, issues like relocation or how they survived different eras throughout history. But also, when I talk about trauma informed, not only trauma of the historic part, but also other traumas that that person you're working with may have experienced, because chances are the current trauma isn't the only trauma that that person has experienced, right? And that's particularly true for us as Native people, as it is for people from other cultures and races, that, chances are there has been some history of sexual abuse, for example, within their family, within this family that you're working with or the individual you're working with. And the current trauma may be bringing up some of that pain and so forth. So it's good to understand that person's history of trauma and how it's impacting them today. Next slide. So I want to take you for a little journey, a little walk through the life of some victims, the victims that we work with often. Um, and I say this, and I say victims enter the system, the criminal justice system, other structures through a variety of doorways, right? So I want to take you on just a little bit of a walk. Next slide. So this is sort of a map, and often when I go on site, I may take our TA participants on a walk through this particular map. And this is a domestic violence victim with her child, and she calls 911. And just based on that one call, a lot of things happen, right? There's a lot of measures taken, a lot of steps taken by a variety of individuals. She's asked a lot of questions. Given that there is that trauma, given there's historic trauma, where she may not have a lot of trust in this individual that's asking her all these questions, because she may not know, what are you going to do with this, my answers? What are you going to do with this information? Perhaps are you going to use it to harm me or take my children from me? Or so it's important that victims receive good information about why they're being asked these questions, and what's going to happen to the information they're going to be sharing. So that mends some of that, addresses some of that distrust that she might be having. Um, and also early on to inform that victim of their rights whenever it seems plausible to do that, because victims react in a variety of ways. Some may seem totally calm and coherent and might be really communicative, while others may have some clear emotional responses, may be very confused, may not want to uh, share information with you, may be sort of shut down. So victims react in a variety of ways. So if it seems appropriate, I really feel that they are entitled to have good information so they can make informed decisions about all of these things that are going to be happening to them as a result of calling 911. Um, so I'm not going to take you on a full walk through this, because it does take time, and I don't have that. But I wanted to show you that even just this part alone, how much this woman or this victim has to face. Next slide. And this is another one. Say, for example, if there's an existing case uh, that's managed by Child Protection, she has that system also to deal with. Or perhaps someone's made a report about her for whatever reason. Maybe it's an issue of neglect, or maybe her abuser has threatened her that if she leaves the abuser, that the abuser is going to report to Child Protection that she's an unfit parent, for example. So, in so doing, there's a lot of things that happen based on this system, this structure's involvement in this victim's life. And again, I'm not going to take you on each step by step. And we also have in our next series next year, we have another series of trainings that we can do. So if there's issues, or if there's special requests for us to maybe go through these things, maybe that's a possibility. But for now, I wanted to show you this is another structure or another system that this victim has to encounter. Next slide. And again, if there's custody issues that the victim may be faced with, and in a power and control, part of the tactics that often abusers use is to threaten victims. If you leave me, I will get a lawyer. I will tell people you're an unfit mother. I'll take the children from you. You'll never see them again. And because that perpetrator or that abuser is holding the resources, um, and the victim doesn't have access to those resources, such as the bank account or the income, the perpetrator or the abuser has the resources to hire an attorney, and maybe a good attorney, and she doesn't, right? She's kind of left at a deficit in that regard. And yet, of course, she wants custody. As Native people, we really believe that, that bond between a mother and a child is a sacred one. And it is for both parents, of course, for, family in general, but that that bond started very early, right? That sacred bond. So, if you provide legal services in the area of custody, this is one area that I know that I've worked with a lot of battered women who need good legal representation in their fight for custody of their children. Next slide. And of course, divorce might be part of that, but I was focusing a little bit more on the custody issue. Housing might also be another issue for victims. If, there's been damage to the property, maybe, I've worked with a lot of victims whose abuser have, knocked the door down or broken the window to gain access, or punched a hole in the wall, or have thrown things and so forth. That could be a huge issue for that victim, because, that could leave the victim houseless. And again, if the house is in the abuser's name, then it becomes even more challenging for that victim to keep a roof over her head, and also for children if she has children. And if there's any legal issues that, are involved there, she may need representation there as well. Um, if there's been any kind of evictions that have been done without a legal basis, that victim may need help in that area as well. Okay, next slide. I just giving you a little statistic here. I don't, it's hard for me to put a lot of weight on existing statistics, because there's still a lot of crime and a lot of, especially sexual assaults, that go unreported or are underreported. But this one is a fairly recent one. Next slide. I've already said a little bit about trauma informed, but I want to visit this a little bit more in detail. So trauma-informed culturally responsive victim interviewing. When I talk about victims enter the door enter the system through different doorways, um, I believe that first contact is so critical. That first contact the victim has with anyone from any of those structures, those systems, is so important. So I do some specific training on, that initial contact that someone may have with that person, with that victim, but also any contact at any time throughout the victim's experience with trying to receive services because of the crime that's been committed against her or him. So first, again, like I said, to understand historic trauma, and also the possible individual trauma experienced by this person. And, again, that maybe this person is not a very talkative kind of person, or maybe they're uh, kind of shut down, are reluctant to share information because they may have that historic distrust, or because of, how she was brought up, her cultural values. She may be feeling some shame. And she just may not trust what people are going to do with the information that she shares, right? And that's why I think it's really important to provide the victim with that kind of uh, good information, so they can make informed decisions. And they need that accurate information, and not to be pressured into making decisions they're not real certain of. Um, I always say, to sort of make the contact a little bit more informalized, to see one another as relatives, because that's how Indian people are. We see each other as relatives, regardless of who we are. And also we even see our creation around us as our relatives. The four-leggeds and the creation around us, those are all all our relatives, right? The living spirits. So, to be able to put aside to some extent that formal kind of interviewing with you have your intake form. It's important to put that aside for a minute just to be able to visit. I call it visiting as relatives. um, Paying attention to body language, for example, inquiring about food or beverage. Maybe they want a drink of water, maybe they want some coffee. To ask that to sort of break the ice with this individual, and also maybe even engage in some small talk, you know, rather than getting right to the heart of things, to be able to maybe ask if they have a child or if they have children. And most parents are happy to be able to talk about their children. And I was talking to a victim once, and she seemed really apprehensive and preoccupied, and I didn't want to push her. It turned out she was worried about, and we were in the emergency room. She was worried about her children getting off the bus and someone meeting them, and didn't she wasn't assertive enough to ask at that moment. So even a little thing like that can help even break down some of that uneasiness. Um, and like I already said, understand everyone responds to trauma in different ways, right? Some people, I've had victims respond really aggressively, real angry that this happened to them, and want that person jailed, arrested, and jailed. Um, but others, may not. There are some that are not. They're not very assertive, and that's not what they want. They don't want this person to go to jail. So it's important to just be aware of those kind of concerns. I say utilize strength-based uh, interviewing or listening to be able to support victims' decision making after they've been given good information, to be able to support their decisions, even if you may not totally agree with them. For example, as a domestic violence advocate, I've worked with victims who have decided to return to the perpetrator, to the batterer. And I understand that. Maybe they have children. They want their children to have both a father and a mother. It's not that they're going back thinking, well, I like to be beaten. But if the batter is saying, "Oh, I won't ever do that again," they want to believe that, right? But oftentimes that's not always the case, right? It can happen again. But even though we believe that it can happen, we still support that victim's choice. But we may discuss safety issues, make a safety plan with that person, and there's specific ways to do safety planning. That I think is really valuable to the lives of a lot of victims and their children and their families. But strength-based, really empower that victim, acknowledging that victim's ability to get up every morning, to send her children off to school, to whatever it is she's sharing with you. Maybe she's a student, maybe she has a job that she's still maintaining. To be able to acknowledge that, in the face of this trauma is really important. Also, to learn active listening skills. I also do training around that, what that looks like. It's things like just paraphrasing what someone tells you so they know you're listening, clarifying if you're not sure, validating them throughout, acknowledging their determination, their self-determination to make their lives better for themselves and for their children. Was there any questions that anyone had? I'm not monitoring the chat. I just wanted to check before I went on. Is that a no?
Hi, Bonnie, this is Marlon. There were just a couple of story share outs about some issues that other attendees see in their communities. For example, housing was an issue specifically in a part of Oklahoma. Added or related to that is also the general topic of lack of housing in some areas. And so there are examples of how families have to move in with extended family members, like a grandmother or other relatives' home. And then
Yes.
it looks like there's also a comment about how in a village there is a lack of housing, and similar to others, family members move in with extended family members. So and the comment goes on to say there are also people moving back to the village after moving away. And those are all the
Yeah.
comments. We're caught up now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Those are all spot on. Housing, affordable, decent housing is so difficult to come by, especially if a domestic violence victim has multiple children, more than one or two. It becomes even more of a challenge. But it's good that our families are accustomed to sharing space and bringing in family members who are having, difficult times. But it also poses some amount of threats too to the family where the victim is fleeing to. So they also need to be considered as part of safety planning, given information on their options. When I talk about custody, I also mention because just because it's culturally appropriate and so important about grandparent rights, I've worked with a lot of families where, grandparents are already taking care of their grandchildren. So I think they deserve to have to be heard and to be able to have their rights rather than having children turn over to non-natives or non-relatives. I really hope that that's also being addressed, especially for incidents where there's custody issues. Next slide. So because our this training technical assistance is really geared towards legal service providers that are either located on tribal lands or near tribal lands, I just wanted to include some of the issues that are often, legal assistance needs of victims. And some of these services, of course, are um, advocates can provide, right? Our advocates are knowledgeable. Some of them have gone to paralegal kind of training, for example. Some of them have worked maybe in law offices, some of them have worked in courts. But, when I do training with advocates, I always encourage them to be mindful of their training and their credentials and their licensure, because if they're not, then it's really important to, not offer legal advice, for example. So I wanted to just talk about some of this. That number one, I say safety. No matter who it is that's providing services to victims, always address that right up front. Um, at any, whatever doorway this victim is entering, the issue of safety is so incredibly important. It's a matter of life and death. It also is so key to the issue of confidentiality and victim rights. They're all intertwined, right? And that's why I say it's important to give victims good information about their rights, about what's going to happen with that information that victim is being asked of, that information that they're sharing, right? That, it should not come back to harm them, if at all possible. Confidentiality, I just said privacy, working with victims. Again, this is a special, population of people, relatives that we work with, where we have to be very careful about their privacy needs, to the extent to not even talk about the work that you've done with a particular victim or a particular family, because someone nearby may overhear it. It could get back to the wrong people, especially with today's social media. So I just say be very careful. It's the worst thing that could happen is for a batterer to hear that, that person that they're controlling and manipulating and keeping from leaving and filing any kind of charges is now doing so, can come back to really hurt that person. Um, Restitution that's obtained as ordered. This is the issue that I have a lot of problems with as an advocate, because it sounds good up front, but it oftentimes isn't enforced, right? And that just adds, that compounds the trauma for many victims. Um, victims should be able to work and not be stalked, not be harassed, not be, that workplace should be safe, and there should be workplace policies that understand the trauma that many victims face with the issue of domestic violence and provide those kind of safety measures within the workplace and not fire someone because she's being stalked, which is she's not inviting that, it's a crime that's being perpetrated against her. Also, even in schools, I've worked with a lot of students who, you know, are raped on campus, for example, and they still need to attend classes on that same campus where their perpetrator is also attending classes. And they may even have trouble going to class because they share a class with that person, or even going to the computer lab because that person stalks them there, for example. And I've had to go all the way to a dean to say this person is not getting help from campus security. We need some additional safeguard measures, which is part of that safety planning I talked about. Custody, like I talked about already, child support is a huge issue for many victims that I've worked with. Children need their pampers, children need their food, children need their roof over their heads, and so forth. Um, Housing assistance, these are all needs that victims have, and to oftentimes they stay because they fear eviction for damages that they haven't caused. Um, like I already said, employment rights, victims taking leave due to abuse. They don't want to go to work with a black eye. Maybe their injuries are such where they can't perform their work. It's important for employers to understand how that person has been incapacitated to no fault of their own. Also, minors seeking protection, minors seeking legal help, and especially if they're afraid of their parents. I've worked with a lot of adolescents who, are victimized and they don't want their parents to know because maybe they were victimized in the course of doing things their parents told them not to do. Doesn't mean they deserve to be victimized, right? So again, there's a lot of legal issues there for teens to get forensic exams, for example. And also, I've worked with victims who may not want to report, and I worked with some who, have warrants for traffic violations, and they don't want to report. They don't want to file a report for a serious crime when their warrant is for a misdemeanor, for a traffic violation. So it's important to work with your local police departments to remove that barrier so they have access to utilizing the system to be able to seek some safety and to hold that offender accountable. Okay, next slide.
Hey, Bonnie, we
Yes,
we had some really good questions in the Q&A.
great.
So Brian was asking about males being advocates and what your experience is, and I guess what your thoughts are on that.
I say it's great. I think there can be male advocates that, as long as our female victims are okay with working with a male advocate. I haven't seen too many issues with that. It's difficult for even like a male victim to want to work with a female advocate because maybe their perpetrator was female. It's really up to that, like I said, that victim-centered response to see what does that victim want? What's going to be the best for that victim? Um, I say I support a good screening process because you anytime you turn on the news, there's the people who are committing these major crimes, and we want to protect the people that come to us, for help to not be re-victimized by any kind of attitudes or criminal behavior, especially. Does that
Um,
help?
he had raised his hand, and I'm not sure if he wants to put another question in the Q&A or in the chat. or if we're unmuting people today. Oh, he just said thank you.
You're welcome.
And then there was a second question about custody. And asking about mediation type services ordered by a tribal court. This person has said, I'm finding it is only prevalent mainly in state and city court settings. And they were curious to know if there's any tribal court that offer those types of services.
Yes, I've heard of tribes utilizing restorative justice in their courts. As an advocate, I would just to say I would exercise caution because we don't want to re-victimize someone who's already been victimized, especially by a system that doesn't acknowledge their trauma. If we bring a victim to a circle like that, and the perpetrator is being for the purpose of holding the perpetrator accountable, and yet there's no treatment or there's no rehabilitation for that behavior. I get concerned about that for repeat offenders. I get concerned that without adequate enforcement, that any kind of restitution that's ordered may not happen in those kind of circles. So I would say yes, they are happening in tribal courts, but I would, especially when we look at major crimes where there's been some pretty serious damages that have happened as a result, may not be suitable for those kind of circles.
Thank
Does
you.
that help?
Waiting to see if they respond. Oh, they were talking for custody cases. Yeah.
Custody. Huh. I that would be a legal thing, I believe.
I mean, I've seen it. I've seen the state court where I'm licensed to practice sends almost all of the custody and divorce cases to mediation, but there's an exception in the law if domestic violence is present.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could just add one more thing, anytime there is going to be any restorative type justice or mediation, depending on where you are and what's going on, if domestic violence has been involved, even if it's a custody, let's say mediation, if domestic violence is involved, you want to be sure that the mediator is well trained in domestic violence, power and control, all understands the safety issues, all of that. And those are sometimes difficult to find because in my experience litigating these kinds of cases and trying to mediate, the mediator who is not trained in the power and control dynamics typically sides with the perpetrator because they're charismatic, smooth talking, very personable, and the client is still under trauma. So I just want to point that out there. It needs, like Bonnie says, do it with caution and make sure the person leading the mediation, again, is well trained in the power and control dynamics.
Thank you.
And then there was one more question about restitution. Elizabeth wanted to know if restitution is if it's the responsibility of an advocate to file OSC motions for non-payment.
I think that varies. I think it varies from tribe to tribe. Certainly,
I
the
agree.
advocate can help.
Right. I agree. And sometimes it depends on if the advocate's a lay advocate, they can come into court, get the forms from the tribal court clerk, file file the motion to the order to show cause, stand there with the victim. But yeah, you always want to, I can hear Bonnie telling me in the back of my mind, always put safety first. Have a safety plan if it's going to be the victim filing the order to show cause. Just have that safety plan in place.
All right. That was the last of the questions for now.
Thank you very much. Next slide. Oh, yep, next slide. Creating strong partnerships with existing structures. I've already kind of shared some of that. Next slide. So if you remember back on these systems that I shared, these are, when a victim calls 911, also if there's a child protection case, if there's housing involved, if there's child custody involved, these are all the different paths that victim may need to walk. And, oftentimes there's still a lot of judgments made about victims, like, why don't she just leave the perpetrator if she doesn't like what's happening? And working with victims that have to, working with them to, navigate this maze. I certainly can understand as an advocate why it would be challenging to leave, especially I don't know how anyone would do it without an advocate. So I just say understand that these are just, and there's others. If we also put another one on another map of the response, if it's sexual assault, then we're looking at all the criminal process that happens, right? The investigation, the forensic exam, and so forth. Okay. And I say, to those of you that do provide legal services, to be familiar with those that are involved with each of these areas. In the event that you would work with a victim, that you would already become familiar to that tribe's system, right? What powers they have, what they maybe they have MOUs with other agencies outside of their tribal jurisdiction. Okay, next slide. This provides just a short listing of some of the teams that exist in tribal communities. And like I said, we have 570 some tribes. Not all tribes have these teams. But where they exist, I believe they are very helpful when we look at how services are provided, and especially to ensure a seamless response. That's always or often the goal of these teams, to make sure that victims aren't falling through the cracks, that it also for like sexual assault response teams, which is the bottom layer of this chart, to create stronger cases for prosecution, and to look at who are the members, to be able to bring those individuals together, and also just to provide that initial victim-centered trauma-informed response to the victim. So teams like this always have the ability to develop response protocols. They also have the ability to share resources. They have the ability to share the challenges that they have, suggestions for one another, and how responses should be coordinated at the time and during, their procedures. They have an opportunity to do cross-discipline training. But I also think it's good for any community to know that these teams exist, even if one exists, to know that their tribe, that there's people that are working together to adequately address this particular crime, whether it's domestic violence or whether it's child abuse or whether it's sexual assault, that all these individuals are coming together at the table to be able to improve services, right? So I think it just produces a united front to tribal members. I also believe that when we talk about offender accountability, these teams are so key to that, are critical to that, right? A CCR, also involves people from probation. It involves people from the jails, and I'll show you a little diagram of that in a minute, so that everyone's on board where, if, a victim or a perpetrator isn't following through with a court order, that there's going to be some communication about that, sharing of information about that to be able to hold that offender accountable. Okay, next slide. So this is the diagram of coordinated community response. CCRs have been around for a long time. I'm kind of proud to say Minnesota's pretty, and that's where I reside here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Are pretty progressive about our response to domestic violence, for example. And one of the first CCRs was developed by a program up in Duluth, Minnesota, who also developed that power and control wheel that many of you might be familiar with. So in this case, this is the team members that come together off and around. And any CCR could be composed of individuals that that particular team decides on, right? And this is just an example of what I put together. So these are the individuals that may come together as part of a CCR, where they meet maybe once a month. And just to be able to, like I said, share information, to develop protocols within their own respective areas, and to be able to share that response protocol with other people at the table that respond to these crimes. And also within that, I added non-tribal legal services and the resources that you all could bring to this process, right? Because you all have valuable information that can be really helpful to the victims, like I've already discussed. And oftentimes those kind of collaborative efforts can be done through the use of MOUs. Okay. Next slide.
Bonnie,
Uh-huh.
related to this slide here, a question was asked, who should be the lead to create CCRT or SART?
I think they could be created by any of these agencies. I've seen, just because of the work that I've done across the country, it's generally been advocacy programs that have started the process. I know here in our county, I was instrumental in bringing people together under my director's advice not to do so. She said they'll all go running if you mention protocol. And actually, we did develop protocol as part of the team here as our SART, and it was amazing. And it still exists today. So here it was as an advocate, I did that. I helped do that. On this slide, also, I didn't mention, re-educating batters, that kind of program to help batters understand where does that behavior come from, that they're making a choice and they can make other choices